Hello lovelies, in this video the brilliant Dr. Webwords is going to be taking you through all of the different ways that we can use plant hormones. This is the information that you need for your A-level biology.
Uses of plant hormones. Plant hormones are used by humans to alter plant growth in agriculture, so farming of crops, and horticulture, which is growing plants for aesthetic purposes, so growing plants that are visually appealing for display. Auxins, for example, are used to prevent leaf or fruit drop, so stop leaves from falling off, or prevent fruit from dropping, so apples obviously and things like that, when they're ready they will drop off the tree, so trying to prevent that too early. Promote flowering, so more flowers or flowering slightly earlier, or in high concentrations auxins can actually promote fruit drop. So you can see how you could use auxins to kind of delay fruit drop for a bit and maybe promote flowers early to kind of get that sexual reproduction happening earlier, but then prevent the fruit drop if they're too small, and then promote the fruit drop when the fruit is the right size. And it can help to manage fruit production, which you obviously want to make sure you have a decent number of a decent sized fruit that you're going to be able to sell for a decent amount of profit. And if you had too many small fruits that wouldn't sell, then that's a waste. So using auxins in this way to kind of control fruit production or flowering in plants that are going to be for sale is something that you can do to kind of manipulate the growth of plants for agricultural purposes. So we're going to look through the different hormones and all of their other different uses in agriculture or farming. So our first use of auxins is that they can be used as weed killers. So synthetic auxins have been produced. So we've taken the auxins that are naturally produced and we can now make them chemically or synthetically in the lab. And they've been used as herbicides, which is the fancy name for weed killers. Herb meaning plant type herb, and side always meaning to kill on the end. And they've been used since the 1940s. So the synthetic auxins have a similar shape to the auxins that are found in the plants. And what they do when they're applied is that they cause the plant to grow too quickly and then die because it can't support itself. So it causes really rapid cell growth and elongation, and the plant grows really fast, but it grows so fast that it hasn't got time to make the structures properly to support itself, so it can fall over and then it will die. They can be selective, so they only target species with broad leaves. So these are normally weed species, so grasses or other weeds that we don't want growing within the crops, because the crops tend to have narrow, thin leaves. So what happens is the weeds have really thick, broad leaves, so when you spray it on, more of those auxins are absorbed onto those broad leaves, and then the weeds die, but the crops don't. And that means that you can spray a whole field, like's happening here with the tractor. You can spray the whole field with this weed killer, and only your weeds will die and not your crops, because they won't be affected. And that means that you can kill plant species that could be competing with your crops for light and nutrients from the soil. And so that means that you actually make sure that all of the inputs that you're putting into your field, your light, your fertilizer, your water, are going to your crops and the crop growth, and not going to help weeds grow, which you don't want, because you can't harvest them and you can't sell them. Auxins are used to produce seedless fruit. Treating unpollinated flowers with auxins can promote seedless fruit growth. Once the ovule starts to grow, this triggers more auxin to be produced in the developing fruit, which then helps that fruit to grow and develop. So it kind of is a self-fulfilling prophecy here. So we treat it with auxin in order to start the ovule from growing and start growing into a fruit, but without seeds, because no fertilization has happened. And then the ovule itself starts producing its own auxin to try and help the developing fruit get bigger as it grows. The other way auxins can be used to clone plants is used in rooting powder. So in this way of cloning, we actually take quite a big cutting. So a few leaves and a bit of stem from one main plant. And then you dip the cut end of your cutting into rooting powder, which is basically sort of a talcum powder or some kind of powder substance that contains auxin. So you dip it in, and so it coats the bottom of the stem, and then you just plant the plant straight into some soil in a pot. And because you've dipped it into that auxin, that rooting powder, it stimulates the roots to grow really quickly. So you can take a few cuttings off of one plant, put them in the rooting powder and put them in the soil, and they'll begin to grow roots really quickly, and you have already a sort of mini plant that's been cloned from that main one. So it's faster than tissue culture, because tissue culture, you're starting with a few cells, a really small bit of the plant, and then you have to wait for them to grow up before you can even think about planting them out. Whereas with this one, you can take a cutting, so you can have a bit of the stem and a few leaves, and then you'll very quickly get a new plant. These are both really good methods for cloning plants, and this is just a way sometimes of getting many new plants quickly. Obviously, the downside is they're all genetically identical, so that can have negative issues because they could all be susceptible to the same diseases, but it's a really quick way of using these hormones to help speed up this plant cloning process. Another hormone can be used in conjunction with auxins here. So cytokinins can also be used to help clone plants in this way. If you take these small bits of tissue, so a leaf or a stem, then the addition of cytokinins can help increase the branching of that, and so produce a lot more branches that can come off of it. And so they can promote this kind of bud and lateral bud growth. And then you can kind of split those branches off in order to produce even more plants that are clones. Ethene is used in the food industry to help to ripen fruit. It is actually a hydrocarbon gas, and it's produced or released by fruits as they ripen. So this is why if you have a kind of yellowy going to brown banana and you have some new fruit that you've bought that's not yet ripe, if you put the banana in the fruit bowl, it will be releasing ethene, and that will help to speed up the ripening of the fruit in your fruit bowl. And this is why it's used in the food industry. So initially fruit is picked unripe. So I've got a very green banana here that's been picked when it's kind of very much not ready to eat. But the reason they do this is because when you're having to transport fruit, sometimes flying it or putting it on ships across from faraway countries, this makes it less soft. So it's harder and more stable, and it means it's less likely to be damaged during the transport process. And then once we get to the shops or where it's about to be sold, they can use ethene and pump ethene into wherever the fruit's being kept, and also warmer temperatures because they would have been kept very chill on their transport. So slightly warmer temperatures in a supermarket, as well as adding the ethene so they can provide the gas in the atmosphere for a small amount of time. That speeds up the ripening of the fruit so that when they go onto the shelves, they're almost ripe, ready to go, so that when you get them home, you can eat them straight away. You don't have to sit and wait for them to ripen for ages. Often, they're going to be sold just before being ripe, so they're not going to fully ripen them, but they're about ready. So that means that you take them home, you maybe have to maximum wait a day or two, and then they're ready to eat. You can also flip this around to the opposite. So we can also restrict the production of ethene in order to delay fruit ripening. So obviously sometimes you want to make fruit ripe ready to be sold, but in other ways you might also want to delay the fruit ripening if it's sort of being stored ready to go out on the shop front and you're not ready for it yet. You might want to delay it from ripening. So keeping it in certain conditions such as low oxygen, low temperature or high carbon dioxide can prevent the fruit from actually producing the ethene. So it prevents the synthesis of the ethene, so it can actually delay the fruit from ripening. There's also some other uses of ethene, so it can help to promote fruit drop. So obviously it can help to speed up the process of, if you want to harvest all the apples at once, you can treat the trees with ethene, and that should help speed up them all dropping the fruit at a similar time. Promoting some lateral bud growth, so if you want small or bushy, lots of branches on your plants, then you can use ethene to help do that. And it also helps to reduce the chance of self-fertilization, which is if you want to keep plants all female, for example, and you don't want them being able to fertilize themselves, you want to make sure the flowers are female flower. In some plants, they'll produce a male and a female flower, and then obviously pollen can fall down from itself to self-fertilize. If you don't want that to happen, because for some things like cucumbers, you don't want the fertilization because that actually makes the cucumber taste bitter, for example. So this ethene can help stop that as well. Gibberellins also have multiple uses. The first one is in plant breeding. So it can be used to induce seed formation on young plants or trees. So often seed production happens and then seed is collected for the next year. And maybe if you've got a young plant that isn't ready or wouldn't normally be ready to produce seed at a certain time, but you need it to seed in order to produce that and collect it for next year or to be sold, then you can induce that using gibberellins. You can also do the opposite and actually use gibberellin inhibitors to keep flowers short. So there are some plants that for aesthetic reasons, people want them to be short and stocky, so not tall and spindly. So you don't want them to grow too tall and thin. You can use gibberellin inhibitors to stop that. And also there are some crop plants that they can grow too tall and spindly and then they can fall over. And then obviously if they fall over, they can get wet, damp, and they can rot. And that's called lodging. And so we don't want that to happen in crop plants. So again, you can use gibberellin inhibitors to stop that. Gibberellins can also be used to end seed dormancy. So when a seed gets wet, so when it gets wet for the first time, it will help release these gibberellins, and that can stimulate the production of amylase to digest starch, and that will release glucose so that the embryo has an energy store ready to start growing and germinating. And that happens naturally. But if you would like a seed to germinate faster than it would happen naturally, then you can use gibberellins to help speed up. It's used in the brewing industry here to increase barley seed germination in order to make malt. The final thing we can use gibberellins for is to increase the fruit size. So seeds in fruit naturally produce gibberellins to increase the size. With cytokinins, so in combination with cytokinins here, we're using them again, they can elongate fruit to improve the shape. So sometimes you want kind of elongated, sort of longer apples, or you want a bunch of grapes to be kind of more spread out. So you want the grapes to be far apart from each other. This is something that you can use gibberellins and cytokinins in combination to help you do that.
Ouch! This is why in some videos I explain scratches.